I want to welcome you back to another video drasha. This week's Torah portion is Yitro. And actually, I want to dwell upon the name of this portion and who was Yitro, who is, of course, in English called Jethro. Now, this portion contains the Decalogue, the so-called Ten Commandments, the revelation at Mount Sinai is in this Torah portion. And so it's a good question, why do we call this portion Yitro, who was the father-in-law of Moses? And as a matter of fact, almost every time that Jethro is mentioned in today's Torah portion, he's called the father-in-law of Moses. Now, if I were writing the Torah, and I were going to name the section that contained the Decalogue and the description of the revelation at Mount Sinai, I think I would have called this portion Moshe. This would be Parshat Moshe. By the way, it's interesting, there is no Parshat Moshe. There's no Torah portion called Moshe. But we do have a Parsha called Yitro. And so the question is, and it really does cry out. You know, there are certain things that we find in the Torah that you could say they really cry out for an explanation. Why would this portion that, again, is so central, containing the Ten Commandments, the Decalogue, why would we call this portion by the name of Moses' father-in-law, Jethro? So I want to discuss Jethro, and I'm going to start with a midrash. In the Talmud, actually, there is a midrash, and this goes back really discussing the first chapter of the book of Exodus, when Pharaoh decrees to throw all of the Israelite male children into the Nile. And according to this midrash, Pharaoh had three advisors. One was Balaam, and Balaam was actually the advisor who came up with this plan, who advised Pharaoh to throw the male Israelite children into the Nile. So what eventually became with Balaam? Well, you know, there's a whole section in the Torah. This comes up again in the book of Numbers, where there's a portion there that deals at length with Balaam, with his attempt to curse the Jewish people, and ultimately Balaam is killed, and that fact is mentioned in the Torah itself. So that's what happens to Balaam. He's the advisor who encouraged Pharaoh to go through with this plan, and in the end, we see that he was, an enemy of the Jews. He wanted to curse them, and ultimately he is killed. The second advisor was Job. And according to this midrash, Job was not in favor of the plan. As a matter of fact, he probably opposed it, but he remained silent. So what eventually happened to Job? Well, we know there's a whole book of the Bible called the Book of Job. It is certainly the most important work on the question of why do bad things happen to good people? Because in the book of Job, we learn that he was a pious man, and yet all of these tragedies occur to him. He loses his family, he loses his possessions, and he's afflicted with all kinds of ailments. And in the book of Job, the main content of it is that his friends come to console him, and they discuss, why is it? Why did these bad things happen to Job? Well, according to this midrash, there is an explanation, and that is that when the plot or the plan to kill the Israelite boys was proposed by Pharaoh, he sat silent. He didn't agree with it, but he also didn't voice his opposition to it. And the third advisor of Pharaoh was Jethro, who is the person that we're discussing here. Jethro, he opposed the plan, and what he did was he ended up running away, escaping from Egypt because of his opposition to the plan and the fact that he, was afraid that Pharaoh would take revenge on him for this. So he leaves Egypt, and what eventually happens, he becomes the father-in-law of Moses, and he converts to Judaism. And indeed, we're told that some of his descendants became members of the Sanhedrin, the high court in Jerusalem. So this is Jethro. Jethro is a convert to Judaism. And so the question of why is it that this Torah portion that contains the Ten Commandments, that contains the revelation at Mount Sinai, why is that called by his name, I think is precisely to make the point that the Torah was not given as a kind of exclusive teaching for one particular people, but that ultimately it was given as a universal teaching that is meant to influence the world, and that ultimately anyone can choose to accept the Torah. And that is why this portion is called by the name of a convert to Judaism. By the way, the same point is made again, and that is on Shavuot, the holiday on which we commemorate the revelation at Mount Sinai. What is the custom to read on Shavuot? It's the scroll of Ruth. Now, what's the story of Ruth? Well, if we read in the scroll of Ruth, we find that Naomi and her husband went to Moab. They had 2 sons who married Moabite women. And then Naomi's husband died, the 2 sons died, and so Naomi was left with her 2 daughters-in-law. And she tells them, you should go back to your father's homes. I have nothing to give you. And the one daughter-in-law does indeed return to her father's home. But Ruth, the other daughter-in-law, says no. She cleaves to Naomi, and she says, your people shall be my people. Your God shall be my God. Where you go, I will go, and where you die, I will die. So Ruth shows that a person who converts to Judaism really becomes a part of the Jewish people. And the fate of the Jewish people becomes their fate. Where you go, I will go. Where you die, I will die, because I will be one with the Jewish people. And so this is the scroll of Ruth, and this is what we read on the holiday of Shavuot, the holiday that commemorates the giving of the revelation at Mount Sinai. So we see this same lesson, the same lesson that we are deriving from the name of this week's Torah portion, Yitro, Jethro. We see that same lesson played out again when we read the scroll of Ruth on the holiday of Shavuot. And so I think the point is very clear here, that Judaism was not meant to be an exclusive religion. It was meant to be a universal teaching, something that would be available to all people and is meant to influence the whole world. It's a question of people choosing to accept the Torah. People have to choose to commit themselves to the life of Torah and to observing the mitzvot. And the fact is, that same lesson applies to those of us who were born Jews as well. Ultimately, you can be born a Jew, but you have to make a decision. Are you going to live your life in accordance with the Torah? That's the same decision that Jethro made. That's the same decision that Ruth made. And it tells us that the Torah was revealed to Moses on Mount Sinai to make it available to all people, that its teachings are universal. It is meant for all humanity. I think it's a very, very important lesson. I want to wish you all a good Shabbos. Hope that everyone is staying safe.